Hello YouTube, Goddard Radio Mosky here again with another beer review for you, as is usual. For this one we're going to head back to Munich, so we're continuing on with the German beer reviews at the moment, and this is one of the breweries that are actually allowed to brew beer for the Oktoberfest in Germany. I think it's 8 of them that are allowed to do this, but the rule for that is that the brewery has to be from the within the walls of Munich, if you like. And I reviewed one of these beers for you about a week ago now, so we're going to have a little look again at Augustiner Bräu and have a look at the Weissbier, and I really like the lager beer Hell that I reviewed for you in my last video that I did of these guys, so hopefully this one's just as good. If you're interested in seeing that video, the link to it is in the video description there, as is the link to the brewery website where you can go and read a little bit more about the brewery. But as is usual with my beer reviews, I'll take you through a brief history of the brewery and tell you a little bit about the beer and things like that before we get on with the tasting. And as I always say, if you are simply interested in the tasting, feel free to go towards the second half of the video and you will catch that particular segment. So anyway, the history of the Augustiner Brewery goes back to the year 1294 when the Augustinian Monastery was built in Haberfeld district next to the Neuhausergasse in the city of Munich. So there's apparently documentary proof that beer was produced within the walls of this building in the year 1328, and the brewing rights were reportedly granted by the order of the Bishop of Freising, and you may recognise this name of that town because it's the home of the Weihenstephaner Brewery, of course the oldest brewery in Germany and indeed the world, founded in 1040, although they were brewing before that. They were only licensed in the year 1040. But that year, 1328, there was a huge fire in Munich that destroyed a large part of the city, and the monastery is actually known to have survived this. So for this reason, the year 1328 is actually considered to be the foundation date of the Augustiner Brewery, and this makes it the oldest brewery within the city walls of Munich. Now, despite the secularization policies that did affect the Augustinian Brewery in 1803, these were actually imposed by Napoleon. This resulted in many Bavarian monasteries becoming state-owned, but beer actually continued to be brewed at the monastery, and the beer continued to be sold in the tavern as well, and they retained their brewing and selling rights, of course, which was quite unique at the time. But the Bavarian prince apparently was the one to grant the monks the brewing rights, and later he also exempted them from the taxes because he really liked the beer and was really impressed with the quality of the beer as well. But eventually the brewery did get taken over by the state, and after the departure of the Brotherhood, the brewery was denationalised and moved to number 275 Neuhauserstrasse in the year 1817, and apparently this is number 27 in Munich's central pedestrian district today. But the company only stayed here until the year 1885 when the Stammhaus was turned into a restaurant, and the Stammhaus actually remains as a restaurant until this day, and was actually at the end of the 19th century, or the beginning of the 19th century, sorry, it was renovated by the famous German architect Emanuel von Seidel. But the brewery was originally privatised by Anton and Theresa Wagner, and they brought the company back in the year 1829, but later in the year 1858 they passed the running of the brewery over to their son Josef Wagner, and the brewery began to majorly prosper under his guidance, if you like, and this is why his initials can be seen on all of the bottle labels today. But since 1885 the brewery has been known as the Keller Real and the at the Landsbergerstrasse, which is today at number 31 to 35. That's where the brewery was, and this is near their brew pub or tavern which is called Braustubel. So you can go and see these in the city of Munich, and I recommend that you do visit Munich if you do go to Germany and try all the different beers that are available there. Some really awesome stuff. But after Josef's death in the year 1900, his sons Richard and Max ran the brewery, and then in 1941 the brewery was actually taken over by Richard's son Rudolf, and he converted the brewery into a limited partnership, and the brewery building was actually very badly damaged during the war in 1941, but it was rebuilt soon after. And Rudolf Wagner actually increased the annual production of the brewery to 300,000 hectolitres per year, and he resisted many takeover bids as well. But sadly Rudolf died in the year 1981 without leaving a will and testament, which meant that the brewery was left to a community of heirs, and this consisted of his cousin Edith Haberland Wagner and 5 others, most of whom actually lived in North America. But Edith Wagner actually took over 50% of the shares of the brewery, and the management of the brewery shops and restaurants was taken over by Ferdinand Schmid and also Karl Grossmann. But upon the advice of Ferdinand Schmid, Edith Wagner actually converted the brewery into a charitable organisation which was known as Edith Haberland Wagner Stiftung, which actually today owns 51% of the brewery shares, obviously the controlling stake. And this was done basically to prevent the brewery from being taken over by some of the larger private brewing groups within Germany, and basically to maintain its independence and protect the Augustiner Bräu tradition. So it's really cool that they've taken these measures to actually preserve the tradition, because this is, like you say, it's the oldest brewery in Munich, and it would be really sad to see the tradition of this thing die or get destroyed by some of these macro breweries and things like that. You know what happens when corporations get their hands on things like this, so really cool to see it maintaining its independence that way. So to tell you about the other beers you can get from the Augustiner Brewery, you can get the Lagerbier Hell, which is the one I've reviewed for you already. You can get Edelstoff, which is a bright export beer. You can get the Weissbier, which is this guy here, the Pils Oktoberfest beer, Maximator, which is a stout. I really want to review that one, in fact. You can get a Dunkel and also a Hellerbock. So hopefully I can review some of the other ones for you in a little while, but let's get on with the tasting of this guy. So I'll bring up the camera and let you have a little closer look at the label. So as you can see, I'm not sure how well you can see it, but just in white lettering here on the silver background, you can see JW, which, as I mentioned, is for Josef Wagner, the one who really sort of put the Augustiner Brewery on a map. And this guy is a 5.4% Hefeweizen beer. I'm not sure if it's a Crystal or a Naturtrüb, but we'll see when we open it up actually. It just says Weissbier, and it's unusual for it to be called a Weissbier in Germany. They always call them Hefeweizens, and then you get the Crystal, Dunkel or Naturtrüb version. So there is the Augustiner Bräu cap on this one, and as you can see, it's actually, this one's actually an anniversary cap, which is the 525th year, which is really cool. But as you can see, quite nicely presented, and it's presented in this kind of Franconian bottle. I believe these types of bottle do come from Franconia, which, as I mentioned earlier, is the sort of, or I mentioned in some of my other videos, this is the region where there's the highest proportion of breweries per head of the population in Germany. So as I mentioned, let's get on with the tasting of this guy now. That's enough information for you. This is a 5.4% Hefeweizen beer. We'll get it open and we'll get on with the tasting here. So there we are. I'll just manage to get the bottle cap off cleanly. As you can see, a nice smoky opening there, and we'll get it out into the glass. This one actually looks as if it might be a Crystal Hefeweizen, which is quite interesting. It's going to have quite a big head on it, this guy. Incidentally, I'm not putting it in the right type of glass. I actually don't have a Hefeweizen glass here with me in Germany. I do have one back home in Scotland, but I don't have one for Germany, unfortunately. We'll just let this guy settle for a little while before we put the rest in. But as you can see, if I hold this up to the light, oh, I was wrong actually. It's a Naturtrüb Hefeweizen. As you can see, it is kind of, it is definitely hazy. If I put my hand behind it, you can see it there. You can't see my fingers through that. So it's definitely a Naturtrüb Hefeweizen. As you can see, a big kind of frothy head, which is what you expect from these style of beers. The colour of this guy, I would say, is definitely a sort of golden amber colour. Orangey amber, you could probably describe it as well, but a really kind of thick foamy head, as you would expect from the Hefeweizen beer. Really attractive looking one actually. There is some big bubbles, visible in this guy, so it should be a fairly smooth one, but Hefeweizens do tend to be very smooth beers, not often such fizzy ones. Just try and get the rest of this in. This is a proper German head on a beer here. They always like their beers to have this kind of convex top to them, but we'll get on with the aroma of this guy. It smells like a typical Hefeweizen. You've got a lot of the kind of bready and yeasty character in there, a little bit of banana as you would expect. But it is really mainly, the banana is quite subtle in this one actually. It's mainly a kind of bready and yeasty dough character that's in with this guy. But the banana actually just complements it nicely actually. And I'm just picking up on just a little bit of that kind of trademark clove spice, if you like. It's quite an interesting one. And there is even maybe just, you can pick up just a little bit of coriander from the smell actually as well. And there's a nice little bit of sort of citrus sweetness in there if you take it in a bit more deeply, I would say. But it's definitely, it's quite sweet on the aroma. It's really an interesting one, in fact, just because it has that spice mixed with the mixed with the citrus notes, which is quite interesting. But like I say, the predominant element to the aroma is definitely the kind of bready yeast that you get from it. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit here, but let's give this guy a taste and see how we get on here. So as you can see, this is how a Hefeweizen should be. It should have this big frothy white head on it, but let's give it a try. It's actually coming across as quite a fizzy beer, first of all. Quite a bit of sedimentation actually just coming out of the bottle there as I put the last little bit in. But yeah, it's coming across as kind of quite a fizzy beer first off, which is unusual. But you are actually getting quite a big dose of bread and yeast, as you would expect, but it's unusual in that sense. It's not quite as sort of sweet and banana-y as you would normally expect. Yeah, it's definitely has a nice. It's the yeasty bread, if you like, is fairly subtle in this one. It's not quite as sweet and punchy as you normally get with some of the Hefeweizens, and the banana is again actually quite subtle as it was in the aroma here. But I'm picking up on a little bit of the clove spice actually. The spice is complementing the carbonation quite well. This one feels as if it's quite well carbonated, but the sort of clove and coriander flavour spice in this one is aiding that, and that might be making it seem as if it's a little bit more carbonated than it actually is. But again, on the aftertaste, it's sweet. It's quite sweet and bready again actually. There's a little bit of citrus just in there, but it's the sweet dough. The dough flavour is actually getting sweeter as you go through the beer, which is unusual. But yeah, this one is unique in the sense that it's actually quite a spicy Hefeweizen. That's the thing that's kind of lying through this one, is that, like I say, the carbon, it feels as if it's well carbonated, but the sort of coriander and clove leaf spice in this one is bringing it out a little bit. The bread and yeasty dough is quite nice, and it's just got a little subtle bit of banana, and I think it does get a little bit sweeter into the aftertaste, and the sweet kind of bready dough with maybe just a little hint of citrus and banana in there is what's lingering into the aftertaste, in fact. But yeah, it's actually, in terms of the mouth, it's actually quite a light-bodied Hefeweizen, and I think it actually is fairly well carbonated, but I can't quite put my finger on whether it's just really spicy and the carbonation's quite low, or vice versa, if you like. I'm really not sure how much the spice is making it feel carbonated. I think it's actually fairly well carbonated, if you like, because the spice flavour would be a little bit more on the middle of the tongue, if you like, but it does feel as if it's more the carbonation that is giving it that feel. So I would say this is a fairly kind of light-bodied, well-carbonated Hefeweizen. It's actually quite a refreshing one, and it has a little bit of a creamy mouthfeel to it, in honesty. Yeah, there's definitely just a little bit of a creamy element to there with the kind of bready dough and things like that. So this guy is quite interesting in that sense. Overall, it's an interesting take on the style, and actually quite different from the other Hefeweizens that you'll get, you know, from like Schneider Weiss or Schufferhofer or Weihenstephan for that matter, the specialist breweries, of course. But this guy is interesting in that regard, so give it a try if you get the chance. You're not going to be disappointed with anything that comes away from Augustiner Bräu. I'm not quite sure if I like it more than the Lagerbier Hell. The Lagerbier Hell was something that did what it was meant to do really, really well. This is an interesting take on the style, but I'm not sure if in fact it is my favourite Hefeweizen. It's a really good example of the style, and it has its own unique points, which is what you look for when you review these beers. But I would say it's a different take on the style, in my opinion, and the flavours are actually quite subtle in it, and that's what makes it quite enjoyable, rather than some of the more kind of pungent things like Franziskaner or Weihenstephan. This guy is a subtle Hefeweizen, and it does it quite well. So if you want a Hefeweizen that is a little bit more subtle and not too acidy or sharp or anything like that, you know, give this guy a try and see what you think of it. So if you do happen to have tried this yourself, let me know in the comments section your own thoughts on it. Always interesting to hear those. But I hope you found the beer review informative. Give this guy a try. Check out the Augustiner Bräu, a really good brewery, the oldest brewery from the city of Munich in Germany. And please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff with my channel, but please help it grow. I really like doing these beer reviews, and it's always interesting to have people point you in the direction of new beer. But this guy, really kind of subtle flavoured and really well done Hefeweizen, if you like, a different take on the style, and I highly recommend you try it, and all the other stuff from Augustiner Bräu, of course. So thanks again for watching my beer reviews. I've got more German beer reviews for you to come, so thanks for your support, and I shall catch you soon. Cheers.